This video contains audio content only. There are no visual elements or images accompanying the audio. If you're expecting to see video footage, please note that this is an intentional audio-only presentation. We recommend listening to this content rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding, and enjoy the audio. Welcome! Ever wonder what happens when a tech titan takes on the federal government? This article dives into the chaos that erupted when Elon Musk, heading the fictional Department of Government Efficiency, DOG, under President Trump, demanded all federal employees email him their accomplishments or risk losing their jobs. We'll explore the fallout from this ultimatum, from panicked employees to defiant unions, and examine the broader implications for the future of government work. Get ready for a wild ride through the halls of power. Chapter 1. The Doge Father's Decree. The Saturday sun cast long shadows across living rooms and coffee tables, promising a weekend of respite from the daily grind. But for hundreds of thousands of federal employees across the United States, the ping of a new email shattered the illusion of tranquility. The subject line, stark and unsettling in its simplicity, read, "What did you do last week?" This seemingly innocuous question, arriving unannounced on a weekend afternoon, carried an undercurrent of dread. It wasn't a casual check-in from a concerned manager. It was a digital decree from the highest levels of power, an ominous prelude to a potential career earthquake. The source of this disquiet was Elon Musk, the mercurial tech titan who had recently been tapped by President Trump to spearhead the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, affectionately, or perhaps ironically, dubbed DOG. Musk, never one to shy away from dramatic pronouncements, had taken to his social media platform, X, just hours before the emails landed, to foreshadow the impending query. Consistent with President at real Donald Trump's instructions, Musk declared in his post, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. The message sent shockwaves through the federal workforce. Musk's ultimatum, delivered with his characteristic blend of bravado and brevity, transformed a simple request for information into a high-stakes game of career survival. The link to President Trump's agenda was clear: the administration's commitment to a smaller, more efficient government, a commitment that had already translated into buyouts, layoffs, and a pervasive sense of unease within the federal ranks. The email itself, originating from the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the federal government's human resources agency, laid out the task. Please reply to this email with approx. 5 bullets of what you accomplished last week, and CC your manager. Please do not send any classified information, links, or attachments. Deadline is this Monday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 5 bullet points, encapsulating a week's worth of work, to be delivered by midnight Monday. The tight deadline, coupled with the implied threat of termination, transformed the weekend from a time of relaxation into a frantic scramble for compliance. For many, the email triggered a wave of anxiety. What constituted an accomplishment in the eyes of Elon Musk? Was it enough to simply list tasks completed? Or was there an unspoken expectation of quantifiable results? Could employees working on sensitive projects, bound by confidentiality agreements, even disclose enough to satisfy the request without jeopardizing national security? The lack of clarity fueled the growing sense of apprehension. The short turnaround time only amplified the pressure. Federal employees, accustomed to the measured pace of bureaucratic processes, found themselves thrust into a corporate-style sprint, forced to justify their existence in a manner that felt both foreign and demeaning. The weekend, meant for family time and personal pursuits, was now consumed by the looming deadline, the specter of unemployment hanging heavy in the air. As word of the email spread, confusion and frustration rippled through agency offices. Some employees, already on edge after weeks of mass firings and buyouts, saw the email as a cruel and unnecessary exercise in intimidation. Now, after more than 2 decades of working in federal service, which includes all outstanding performance reviews and something like 18 performance awards, someone at OPM is going to read my 5 bullets and decide if I'm productive enough? One exasperated employee lamented. Others questioned the legality of Musk's ultimatum and the authority of OPM to demand such a report. The American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, the largest union representing federal workers, quickly denounced the move, calling it cruel and disrespectful, and vowing to challenge any unlawful terminations. It is cruel and disrespectful to hundreds of thousands of veterans who are wearing their second uniform in the civil service to be forced to justify their job duties to this out-of-touch, privileged, unelected billionaire who has never performed one single hour of honest public service in his life. AFGE President Everett Kelly declared in a statement. The initial reactions varied widely. Some employees, fearing for their jobs, scrambled to craft the perfect 5 bullet points, agonizing over every word and phrase. Others, more defiant, resolved to ignore the email altogether, viewing it as an overreach of authority. Still others, caught in the crossfire of conflicting directives, sought guidance from their supervisors, only to find them equally bewildered. Some agencies, sensing the brewing discontent, took preemptive action. The FBI, for instance, instructed its employees to pause any responses to the OPM memo, assuring them that the Bureau would handle its own internal review processes. The State Department followed suit, informing its staff that the department would respond on their behalf. These acts of defiance, while offering temporary relief to some, only added to the overall sense of disarray. The Pentagon, too, stepped in, instructing its employees to pause any response to Musk's team. The Department of Defense is responsible for reviewing the performance of its personnel, and it will conduct any review in accordance with its own procedures, a Pentagon official clarified. This pushback from key agencies, some led by Trump appointees, hinted at a potential power struggle within the administration and further fueled the uncertainty surrounding Musk's role and authority. Meanwhile, Musk, seemingly unfazed by the growing backlash, doubled down on his demand. He dismissed concerns about the short deadline and the lack of clarity, claiming that the request was a very basic pulse check, intended to identify those who were doing so little work that they are not checking their email at all. He even went so far as to suggest, without evidence, that non-existent people or the identities of dead people are being used to collect paychecks, hinting at widespread fraud within the federal government. As the weekend drew to a close, the "What did you do last week?" email remained a source of profound anxiety and confusion for federal workers. The simple question, amplified by Musk's pronouncements and the Trump administration's aggressive downsizing agenda, had cast a long shadow over the federal workforce, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that would linger long after the Monday midnight deadline. The Dogefather had spoken, and the federal bureaucracy held its breath, awaiting the consequences. Chapter 2. Chaos in the Capitol. Panic rippled through the federal workforce like a seismic wave. The sudden Saturday delivery and the impending Monday night deadline compounded the anxiety. A Department of Education employee, already grappling with work stoppages caused by recent executive orders, described the feeling as harassment. The blatant pre-announcement on X, she said, felt like a deliberate attempt to maximize the weekend's disruption. A park ranger at Yellowstone National Park, whose office was thousands of acres of wilderness, found the email particularly absurd. How could he quantify the impact of preserving natural beauty or ensuring visitor safety? He imagined bullet points like, prevented 3 tourists from falling into geysers, advised 1 family on bear safety, removed graffiti from historic landmark. He scoffed. It felt like reducing his dedication to public service into a corporate performance review. The internal discussions began almost immediately. Group chats buzzed with anxious questions. Emails flew back and forth between colleagues, seeking clarification and reassurance. Did anyone else get this crazy email? One message read. Another responded, I'm freaking out. I'm on probationary status. Does this mean I'm getting fired? Supervisors, caught equally off guard, offered little comfort. Many hadn't received any guidance from their own superiors and were left to interpret the email as best they could. A manager at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, after receiving a flurry of panicked calls from his team, sent out a cautiously worded email. To be clear, this is irregular, unexpected, and warrants further validation by management, he wrote, advising his staff to hold off on responding until further notice. The lack of clear direction created a chaotic patchwork of responses. A veteran at the Department of Veterans Affairs, VA, who had dedicated his career to serving his fellow veterans, felt a deep sense of disrespect. It's insulting, he confided to a colleague, to have my service reduced to 5 bullet points, to be judged by someone who's never spent a day in public service. It's just wrong. A lawyer at the Department of Justice, grappling with the implications of disclosing sensitive case details, felt trapped. I can't risk violating attorney-client privilege, he explained to his supervisor, but I'm also terrified of losing my job. He spent his Sunday afternoon poring over ethics guidelines, desperately searching for a way to comply without jeopardizing ongoing investigations. The atmosphere within agencies was thick with tension. The usual hum of bureaucratic activity was replaced by a frantic energy. Keyboards clacked furiously as employees attempted to distill their work into the required format. Some emails arrived, flagged with high importance and red exclamation marks, underscoring the perceived urgency and gravity of the situation. Others, desperate for guidance, sat glued to their phones, refreshing their inboxes and waiting for instructions that never came. The confusion extended beyond the executive branch. Employees in the federal judiciary, including judges and court staff, also received the OPM email, even though the court system operates independently. The Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts quickly issued guidance advising employees to disregard the request. Even within the executive branch, the number of affected employees was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of civil servants, from scientists at the CDC to park rangers at Yellowstone, from lawyers at the DOJ to analysts at the NSA, found themselves caught in the DOGE dragnet. The wide range of agencies involved, from national security to public health to environmental protection, highlighted the vast scope of Musk's ambition to reshape the federal government. As Monday evening approached, the sense of unease intensified. The arbitrary deadline, coupled with Musk's ominous pronouncements, created a climate of fear and uncertainty. The "What did you do last week?" email, a seemingly simple request, had become a symbol of the chaos and disruption unleashed by the DOJ initiative. The federal workforce, once a bastion of stability and predictable processes, now found itself operating under a new set of rules, a set of rules dictated by the whims of a billionaire tech mogul, with a penchant for dramatic pronouncements and a mandate to dismantle the very bureaucracy he now sought to control. The clock ticked down, and the federal government braced itself for the fallout. Chapter 3. Whispers of Dissent. The chaos unleashed by Musk's Saturday night email wasn't confined to the rank and file of the federal workforce. Behind the scenes, within the very administration that ostensibly sanctioned the directive, a quiet rebellion was brewing. The "What did you do last week?" email, intended as a tool of efficiency, instead exposed deep fissures within Trump's inner circle, revealing a power struggle that played out in hushed phone calls and hastily drafted emails. While President Trump publicly lauded Musk's aggressive approach to government reform, some of his most loyal appointees were quietly pushing back against the DOGE's heavy-handed tactics. At the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, an internal conflict played out in real time, illustrating the confusion and conflicting loyalties within the administration. The acting general counsel, initially a supporter of the DOGE initiative, expressed serious reservations in an internal email. He confessed to feeling personally insulted by the OPM email, having worked over 70 hours the previous week. He voiced concerns about the lack of safeguards for employee responses, particularly given the sensitive nature of HHS work, which often involves protected health information and attorney-client privilege. "I have received no assurances," he wrote, "that there are appropriate protections in place to safeguard responses to this email." This initial hesitation, however, was short-lived. Hours later, a new directive from HHS leadership instructed all employees to comply with the OPM request, seemingly overriding the general counsel's concerns. This abrupt about-face not only highlighted the internal power dynamics within HHS, but also exposed the lack of a cohesive strategy within the Trump administration regarding the DOGE's role and authority. The reasons for these agencies' defiance were multifaceted. Some, like the FBI and State Department, emphasized the importance of maintaining established chains of command and internal review processes. Others, like the Pentagon and HHS, expressed concerns about protecting classified information and sensitive data. Still others questioned the legal authority of OPM, an agency primarily responsible for human resources functions, to demand detailed work reports from employees of other federal agencies. One senior official, speaking on condition of anonymity, went so far as to call the email irregular, unexpected, and warranting further validation. This sentiment, echoed in private conversations and leaked emails, revealed a growing unease within the administration about Musk's methods and the potential legal ramifications of his actions. Underlying these practical concerns were deeper political currents. Some observers speculated that the resistance to Musk's email was a manifestation of a turf war within the Trump administration, a clash between established power structures and the newly empowered DOGE. Others saw it as a reflection of differing interpretations of Trump's directive. While the president had publicly called for a more aggressive approach to government reform, some of his appointees may have felt that Musk's methods were too extreme, potentially jeopardizing critical government functions and alienating key constituencies. One Republican lawmaker, speaking on a Sunday morning news program, urged Musk to put a dose of compassion into his cost-cutting efforts, acknowledging the real-life consequences of mass layoffs and bureaucratic upheaval. Whatever the motivations, the internal dissent had a profound impact on the federal workforce. The conflicting messages from different agencies created a climate of confusion and uncertainty. Employees were left wondering whom to listen to, whom to trust. Were they supposed to comply with the OPM email or follow the guidance of their agency leadership? The lack of clarity only amplified the anxiety and resentment already simmering within the federal ranks. One federal employee, expressing their frustration in an anonymous interview, said, "It feels like we're caught in a game of tug-of-war, and we're the rope." The "What did you do last week?" email, initially intended as a simple request for information, had become a lightning rod for internal dissent, exposing the fault lines within the Trump administration and highlighting the challenges of implementing sweeping government reforms. The whispers of dissent, once confined to hushed conversations and back channels, were now amplified by the media, adding another layer of complexity to the already chaotic situation. As the Monday night deadline loomed, the federal workforce braced itself for the consequences, not only of Musk's ultimatum, but also of the internal power struggles that had been brought to light by his controversial email. Chapter 4. The Union's Roar. Far from mere condemnation, their response was a potent mix of outrage, legal action, and strategic guidance, aimed at protecting their members from what they perceived as an unlawful and disrespectful attack on the federal workforce. The AFGE's actions went beyond strong words. The union immediately vowed to challenge any unlawful terminations resulting from the email. They argued that OPM lacked the legal authority to demand such information from employees of other agencies. Federal law, they pointed out, grants agency heads, not OPM, the authority to manage their own employees and request information related to their work. This legal interpretation formed the basis of their lawsuit against the Trump administration, aiming to protect federal workers' civil service protections and prevent their dismissal without cause. They weren't just fighting for their members' jobs. They were fighting for the integrity of the civil service system itself. The National Treasury Employees Union, NTEU, joined the chorus of disapproval, labeling the email completely un-American and a blatant attempt to intimidate civil servants. NTEU President Doreen Greenwald called out the administration for attacking a vital resource for the American public. The NTEU, like the AFGE, questioned the legality of the demand, arguing that it circumvented established procedures and chains of command. They weren't just concerned about the email itself. They saw it as part of a broader pattern of disrespect and disregard for the federal workforce. Several local union chapters took a more proactive stance, advising their members to disregard the email altogether until further guidance could be provided. One chapter of the NTEU, representing Food and Drug Administration (FDA) employees, issued a bold directive. NTEU advises you not to sign that email until we get more info. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was a direct challenge to the administration's authority, a sign that the unions were prepared to stand their ground and protect their members. The FDA chapter argued that OPM directives didn't apply to their members unless formally adopted by the FDA itself. They emphasized that their members worked for the FDA, not OPM, underscoring the legal argument about agency authority. This direct instruction to disregard the email reflected a growing trend of resistance within the federal workforce. Employees, already on edge after weeks of mass firings and buyouts, were tired of the uncertainty and the disrespect. The email, with its arbitrary deadline and vague demands, felt like the last straw. One Department of Education employee called it terrible and harassment, noting the deliberate weekend timing. Another worker at the CDC said they could only imagine how many people would be fired based on their responses, or lack thereof. The unions, sensing this groundswell of discontent, stepped into the void, providing legal interpretations, strategic advice, and a much-needed sense of solidarity. They offered a counter-narrative to the administration's rhetoric of efficiency and accountability, framing the email as an attack on the civil service and an attempt to circumvent established legal protections. They reminded their members of their rights, assuring them that they weren't alone in this fight. Beyond the legal arguments, the unions also highlighted the practical implications of Musk's demand. They raised concerns about the confidentiality of sensitive information, particularly for employees working in national security, law enforcement, and intelligence. They pointed out the absurdity of trying to quantify the work of employees whose jobs involved complex analysis, nuanced decision-making, or long-term projects. They questioned the value of reducing a week's worth of work to 5 bullet points, arguing that it was a superficial and meaningless exercise. The tension between management and labor reached a fever pitch as the Monday night deadline approached. The administration, facing mounting criticism from unions, lawmakers, and even some of its own appointees, remained largely silent. There was no official response to the union's legal challenges, no attempt at dialogue or negotiation. This silence only fueled the perception that the administration was dismissive of employee concerns and determined to push forward with its aggressive downsizing agenda, regardless of the legal or practical consequences. The atmosphere within the federal workforce was one of anxiety, frustration, and defiance. Employees felt betrayed by the administration, unsupported by their supervisors, and uncertain about their future. Some complied with the email out of fear, while others resisted out of principle. Many sought refuge in their unions, finding strength in numbers and a sense of shared purpose. The "What did you do last week?" email, initially intended as a tool of control, had inadvertently galvanized the federal workforce, strengthening the bonds of solidarity and setting the stage for a protracted battle over the future of the civil service. The unions had drawn a line in the sand, and the administration, with its silence and its unwavering commitment to the DOGE initiative, seemed prepared to cross it. Chapter 5. The Fallout. The email's impact on morale was devastating. Federal employees, already on edge after weeks of mass firings and buyouts, felt devalued and demoralized. The demand to justify their work in 5 bullet points, particularly on a weekend with a tight deadline, felt like a slap in the face. The VA veteran, who had dedicated his life to serving his country, felt a profound sense of disrespect. The DOJ lawyer, caught between the demand for information and the need to protect confidential case details, felt trapped and anxious. The sense of betrayal was palpable. Many employees, even those who complied with the email, began to question their future in government service. Some started looking for other jobs, not necessarily because they feared immediate termination, but because they felt disillusioned and undervalued. The long-term consequences of this potential brain drain, the loss of experienced and dedicated civil servants, remained a looming concern. Adding fuel to the fire was Musk's unsubstantiated claim that non-existent people, or the identities of dead people, are being used to collect paychecks. This accusation, thrown out without a shred of evidence, further inflamed tensions and fueled the perception that the email was less about improving efficiency and more about purging the federal workforce. It played into the narrative, already circulating among employees, that the administration was using the DOGE initiative as a cover for a politically motivated attack on the civil service. The email's effectiveness as a tool for improving government efficiency was hotly debated. Musk and Trump touted it as a basic pulse check, a necessary step towards identifying and eliminating waste. They pointed to DOGE's reported $55 billion in savings, achieved through various measures such as workforce reductions, contract renegotiations, and program changes, as evidence of their success. However, they failed to demonstrate any direct connection between the email incident and these savings. In fact, the email itself likely cost the government money, as hundreds of thousands of employees spent valuable time crafting their responses, time that could have been spent on their actual work. Critics, on the other hand, dismissed the email as a heavy-handed and ultimately ineffective tactic. They argued that reducing a week's worth of work to 5 bullet points was a superficial and meaningless exercise, failing to capture the complexities of government work. They pointed to the chaos and confusion created by the email, the conflicting directives from different agencies, and the demoralizing effect on the workforce as evidence of its counterproductivity. They argued that the email, far from promoting efficiency, had actually disrupted operations and undermined morale. The long-term consequences of the "What did you do last week?" email extended far beyond the immediate fallout. The incident further eroded trust between the administration and the federal workforce, exacerbating the already strained relationship. It contributed to a climate of fear and uncertainty, making it more difficult for agencies to recruit and retain talented employees. It also raised serious questions about the legality and ethics of the DOGE initiative, setting the stage for potential legal challenges and further scrutiny from Congress and the media. The email's legacy was one of division and dysfunction. It highlighted the dangers of prioritizing short-term political gains over the long-term health of the civil service. It served as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of top-down mandates and the importance of respecting the expertise and dedication of the people who work tirelessly to serve the American public. The 5 bullet points, initially intended as a measure of productivity, became instead a symbol of the administration's disregard for the very workforce it claimed to be improving. The fallout from the email, like a lingering cloud of toxic gas, continued to poison the atmosphere within the federal government, casting a long shadow over its future. Elon Musk's demand for federal employees to list their accomplishments sparked chaos, anxiety, and legal challenges. This incident reveals a deeper struggle over government efficiency, executive authority, and worker rights. The fallout damaged morale and raised questions about the long-term health of the civil service. This case study highlights the complex interplay of technology, leadership, and bureaucratic structures. What are your thoughts on using such drastic measures to improve efficiency? Let's discuss in the comments. Like and subscribe for more explorations of leadership and organizational dynamics. Keep asking questions and never stop learning.